Hello, this is part 2 of understanding ADA, IDEA, and Section 504, and this part is looking at the IEP. This diagram on the screen is just a quick diagram of that process from referral to the first annual review. You start with the referral, you have an evaluation, there's a determination of eligibility. If the student is eligible, you'll develop the IEP and determine placement. That will be followed by implementation of the IEP and instruction. And during that time, you'll have progress monitoring and progress reporting. And then you'll have time for the annual review. And then every 3 years, you're required to have a reevaluation. This is a diagram of the timeline from referral to IEP. This comes from the Colorado Department of Education's IEP procedural guidance. This is important to be aware that a special education referral is initiated after the signed parental consent for evaluation is received by the administrative unit. So the request to evaluate or the recommendation to evaluate it's the school's responsibility, but it can come from the parents. It might come from a related service provider, a therapist, or a medical provider who suggests that the student should be evaluated because they suspect there's a disability. But until that consent is signed, this timetable doesn't run. Once that consent is signed, the evaluation must be conducted within 60 days, and then with 30 days after that or 90 days from the consent, the IEP needs to be developed. In the evaluation, the school must notify the parents, describe the procedures, and obtain written consent. Once the evaluation is completed, the parents must be given a copy of the evaluation report. In conducting the evaluation, they must use a variety of assessment tools. First, to determine if the child has a disability under IDEA, one of those 13 or 14 categories. If the student is determined eligible, they'll use that information to develop the contents of the IEP. They must evaluate in all areas related to the suspected disability. So when you're getting ready, you want to make sure you consider all the areas that might need to be evaluated. That might include health, vision, hearing, social and emotional functioning, general intelligence, academic performance, communicative status, and motor abilities. The evaluation also must not be discriminatory or have racial or cultural biases. When the evaluation is complete, you'll have an eligibility determination. The evaluation and eligibility determination are to be completed within 60 days after that signed written consent. And the parents and school staff will decide if, because of the disability, there's a need for special education and related services. This determination can't be made because the child has had a lack of appropriate instruction or limited English proficiency. Often you may have a separate eligibility meeting, or it might be combined. It depends on the circumstances. This is a diagram before we talk about the IEP, comes from the Colorado Department of Education's Alternative Dispute Resolution Project. We call it the FAPE Continuum. And this really highlights the process. You start with that evaluation. You determine present levels and needs. So where is the student now? What's that baseline? What do they need so that they can make progress in the educational environment? You'll set measurable annual goals, and then you'll explain the services they'll receive in the least restrictive environment, including their accommodations and modifications. And we're looking for educational benefit, and you'll get that progress monitoring and progress reports. And the goal is to have educational benefit after that year. Each IEP is a plan for the coming year. And overall, we want those to be building toward that goal for everyone, that at the end of this education, they're ready for either further education, employment, and that they're able to live independently to the extent that is appropriate in their situation. IEPs have two general purposes. First, to establish the measurable annual goals for the child, and to state the special education and related services and supplementary aids and service that will be provided to the child. When they're constructing that program, the team wants to consider involvement in the general education curriculum and in extracurricular and non-academic activities. So you're not just focusing on the classroom. We're looking at the broad experience, including extracurricular and non-academic activities. And this also includes participation in PE. Who develops the IEP? There are actually required members of the IEP team. Those are the first 5 on this list. It includes the parents, not less than 1 regular education teacher, not less than 1 special education teacher, a school district representative, and that representative should be able to commit the resources of the district to carry out that IEP, and a person to explain the evaluation results. Be aware that a person can fill more than 1 role. So for those 5 people, you might not have a specific person for each role, but you need to have all those roles filled. There may be circumstances where a student doesn't have someone, and so you wouldn't have that person at the meeting. You can also have related services staff and others who know the student. That's a really important group for families. That's how you can bring others to the meeting. A lot of people say never go to your IEP meeting alone. And so if you want to bring a friend or a relative or an advisor to the meeting, that's how you bring them to the meeting. And then the student and the student's role, if as much as you can, it is great to involve the student in the IEP process. As they move toward secondary transition, they are required to be invited and their input is needed. But the earlier you can start that, the more prepared they will be when it becomes more necessary. So even if it's just for small parts of the IEP meeting or just presenting their student input, whatever works for the student, this can be a great way to work toward those ultimate goals of the IEP process. This is just a quick view of the contents of the IEP. You start with the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Sometimes people call this the PLAF. You may also hear people calling it the PLOP. It used to be present levels of performance. And that's where you're looking at the baseline. Where are they? What are their needs? This is the section for parent and student input. And then you'll develop the measurable annual goals. You'll talk about progress, how progress will be measured and how it will be reported. You'll have the statement of the special education and related services, as well as supplementary aids and services, a description of the modifications and accommodations, an explanation to the extent, if any, to which the child will not participate with non-disabled children in the regular class and in extracurricular and non-academic activities. This is the least restrictive environment. IDEA has a strong preference for students to participate with non-disabled children to the maximum extent appropriate. And so the way this is worded is it has to justify why they're not. You don't have to, you don't have to prove why they should be. You have to justify why they are not. And then you'll have a service delivery table that will have the projected date for the beginning of the services and modifications and the anticipated frequency, location, and duration of those services and modifications. And you want to pay attention to the location and duration. One of the ways they measure whereas the time that a student's spending in the general education classroom will be a percentage. And so looking at the times of the number of minutes and where they are can help you make sure they're meeting that percentage requirement. So that's a very quick overview of the IEPs. Again, Peak Parent Center parent advisors are available to answer your specific questions about your situations.